Welcome to Novel Feelings, where two psychologists take a deep dive into your favorite books. I'm Priscilla.
And I'm Elise. Today we have an interview with Neal Shusterman, author of All Better Now. We have a lot to talk about, including what a happiness virus would really entail, more on that later, as well as Neal's writing process and character development.
If you haven't heard of Neal Shusterman, he is an award-winning and New York Times bestselling author of more than 50 award-winning books for children, teens, and adults, including Challenger Deep and the Arc of a Scythe series. We reviewed Challenger Deep as part of Season 3's book club, so please check out that episode. And as a side note, while I was going through Neal's biography, apparently, as a screen and TV writer, Neal has written for the Goosebumps and Animorphs TV series and wrote the Disney Channel original movie Pixel Perfect. I'm including this because I loved both Animorphs and Pixel Perfect as a child. And it's so, I don't know, like it's so weird / interesting when someone's art has touched your life like across the years without you realizing.
Yeah, well, of course, Neal is hugely prolific writer, and I didn't know about that either. And I loved Animorphs as a kid too. So what an interesting tidbit to learn about. So a little bit about All Better Now, which is the focus of our interview today. A deadly and unprecedented virus is spreading, but those who survive it experience long-term effects no one has ever seen before: utter contentment. More and more people begin to revel in the mass unburdening, but not everyone. Campaigns start up to convince people that being eternally happy is dangerous. The race to find a vaccine begins. Meanwhile, a growing movement of recoverees plan ways to spread the virus as fast as they can in the name of saving the world. It's nearly impossible to determine the truth when everyone with a platform is pushing their agenda. 3 teens from very different backgrounds who've had their lives upended in very different ways find themselves at the centre of a power play that could change humanity forever. All Better Now is out now through Walker Books Australia or Simon & Schuster for US listeners.
Please check out our show notes for disclaimers and content notes.
And over to our interview with Neal.
Welcome, Neal, to Novel Feelings. Thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and congratulations on the publication of All Better Now earlier this year. What has the reception been like so far?
It has been wonderful. It has been wonderful internationally, in the US, in the UK, and of course there in Australia. It's been a very positive. And I understand that that the German version is coming out next month, and I'm getting very excited about that as well. I think it's a story that transcends language, that transcends cultures, and I love it when people from different countries are reading the books.
Brilliant. It sounds like you've been doing a lot of international promotion as well. We know you were just in Australia, and we're sad to have missed you when you were doing the promo circuit here. Have you been doing a lot of globe trotting as part of the promotional tour?
I have been. I was in Bangkok, and I'm going to be going to Europe in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be in Spain. I'm going to be at the Celsius 232 Festival. And then in the fall, I'm going to be in Singapore. So I'm getting a chance to hop around the world.
That's wonderful.
How exciting. And we were looking at your website in preparation for this interview, and we saw that you've published 1 book every 2 to 3 years since 1988, and sometimes even 2 books a year. And of course, this is incredibly impressive. What is the key to writing so consistently?
1988. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I look back at that date and it's like, how has time flown so quickly? And when you average it out, it's actually about a book and a half a year. And how I do it, it's just 1 page at a time. Like today was a writing day, and I managed to get 3 pages written, and that was an accomplishment. Over time, it adds up. And then I look at a big thick book, like The Toll, which is more than 700 pages long, and I look at that and I say, how did I do that? It took almost a year, just writing a couple of pages a day, or days where I had a week where nothing came, and then suddenly I had this flood of creativity, and then I got 10 pages written in a day. It ebbs and it flows, but it's always just 1 page at a time.
Yeah. And are you always working on 1 book at a time?
Usually, no. Usually I work on multiple projects, but not at the same time. It's more like I'll spend a month working on a book, and then I'll burn out on it. Then I'll just feel as if I need to put this aside, and I'll put it aside, and then I'll get to work on something else. But then I'll work on that for a few weeks, and then rewrite notes come back from another project. So I switch gears and I work on that. But then I get notes from a studio on a script that's due, and so I have to change gears and work on that. So I'm constantly bouncing around working on different projects. I'm very rarely working on like one thing in the morning and then something else in the afternoon. Usually I work on something for several weeks before I switch gears to something else.
Okay. You mentioned the toll before, and I know this is not a direct comparison, but the concept of All Better Now actually put me in mind of Arc of a Scythe series. Can you comment on the parallels between the two?
Well, both series take place in a world that is ostensibly moving towards being this perfect society. I mean, in Scythe, we've already gotten there. We've achieved everything that we want to achieve as a civilization, as a species. Whereas in All Better Now, there is this virus that basically brings contentment, that makes everybody feel that sense of deep joy and contentment with their lives. So in a sense, that is similar to the idea of a perfect world. But there are always those who don't feel comfortable with that, who want to subvert that. And so and both stories have that element to it.
Yeah. In preparation for this interview, I was looking at your other interviews, and you talked about how the inspiration of this book came from that comment about how you always predict unhappy things in the future. When I saw that, I thought, well, actually, Scythe is a utopia. You were predicting a utopia that sort of turned into not that eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, I was at an event at a bookstore, and people were talking about how my stories are prophetic. The stories that I tell tend to have, take characters toward dark places. Never leaves them in a dark place. That's very important to me. My stories are always about hope. They always take you through the ringer to bring you out to a better place where you've learned something from the experience, or the characters have learned something from the experience that they've gone through. But there's Dry, which deals with the drought in Southern California, and I know that in Australia you've been dealing with drought conditions and fires as well. So you know how that is. And there was a sort of a lot of things that felt prescient about it. And Scythe, I don't know about you, but when I have conversation with ChatGTP, it's like I'm talking to the Thunderhead.
A little bit, yes.
Someone in the audience said, "Why don't you predict something happy?" And it was kind of a funny comment, but it got me thinking. The idea of predicting something happy. And I thought about the idea of the pandemic. I mean, that happened right as we were coming down off of COVID. And I thought, what if the next pandemic isn't one of misery, but what if it's a pandemic of joy? What if I predicted a pandemic of joy? And where would that go? Where would that take us as a civilization if suddenly everybody was being infected by happiness? And of course, I can't just let that be something happy. There has to be, there's multiple layers to that. So I wanted to explore that.
And we love layers here. And I also love the idea of not being a typical dystopian novel. It's more of a utopian novel with some dark elements or some real depth to it, which is really wonderful to see. And we wanted to talk about the characters in All Better Now as well. Mm-hmm. So Ron, Morgan and Marielle all have very different backgrounds. So Ron, of course, being the favoured son of a billionaire, struggling with depression at the start of the story. Marielle has experienced homelessness and pretty much parented her mother. And then the incredibly intelligent Morgan, who, to put it lightly, has quite complicated relationships with the people in her life. Can you tell us a bit about how their experiences informed their stances on Crown Royale, the virus at the center of the story?
Well, and I started with the idea that I wanted to show three different legitimate points of view on Crown Royale, which is the name of the virus. I wanted someone who struggled with depression, who wanted to catch it and have that depression lifted. And that's, the effect of Crown Royale. It brings long-lasting joy for the rest of your life and contentment. And so I wanted a character who felt that they needed that than anything. And that became Ron. On the opposite extreme, I wanted a character who believed that this was the worst thing for humanity, who felt that eternal joy would steal our agency. It would turn us into pod people, and we wouldn't be ourselves anymore. And therefore, it needed to be fought against. And then I wanted a character who saw both sides, who realized that this could very well be the next stage of human evolution, that brings us to a species that no longer even understands the concept of hatred and anger and unhappiness. But can we survive that transition? Will we destroy ourselves before we can make that transition? Because, I mean, this is basically an upheaval of human nature. How do we deal with that? How do we make it through that? So those were the 3 points of view, and I wanted the characters to come from different kinds of backgrounds, and I wanted to see how they interacted when they were brought together. It was kind of difficult with Morgan because she doesn't actually get together with the other characters until much later in the story. So I wanted to still have a sense of interaction, even though they weren't directly interacting.
Yeah, it's all very cinematic. I feel that you get different point of views throughout the book, and that you even get like global perspective as well.
Well, thank you for saying that. I wish the entertainment industry would hear you.
Yeah.
If we had the power.
With the entertainment industry is that they hear the word pandemic and they race in the opposite direction.
Right.
So
okay.
It's been making it very difficult to set it up for entertainment. Scythe, on the other hand, is being developed as a TV series, and that's moving forward very quickly. So hopefully, if that goes, maybe people will have a look at All Better Now.
Well, I'm very excited for that TV series.
Priscilla's already saved the date in her calendar.
Yes.
Of course. Well, yes, truly fascinating characters. And as Priscilla was saying, we really loved the international focus of the book and how we jump around from different countries. We see the point of view characters, of course, and what they're going through and how they interact with each other. But we also get glimpses of how the virus is affecting people everywhere. You know, we get these brief, almost point of view moments throughout the book where it might be someone who is giving away property, or someone who is living in a homeless shelter of sorts, and what this is like for them. So we get to see so many perspectives of how this happiness virus can change people's lives.
That was one of the fun parts of telling the story, and I've done that before in Dry. I mean, there were these things that I wrote Dry with my son Jared, and there were these chapters that we called snapshots. The book is told in first person from basically 4 different points of view, and we realized we would not be able to see the larger impact in the world, how things that are happening that these characters can't experience. And so we structurally set up these snapshots that were told in third person when the rest of the book was in first person. And they were sort of just little vignettes that showed just little stories of other things happening. And I thought that would be a really good thing to do for All Better Now as well, because there were so many different aspects that our main characters would not experience. And so setting those up, I differentiated them by making them third person present rather than third person past, which is the rest of the book is in. And it was a way of really showing how people were being affected by Crown Royale in different ways that our main characters were not aware of.
Yeah, and I really like that you get a sense of the systemic effect of Crown Royale as well in some of them, like the army pilot that was affected and then refused to continue with their duty.
One of my favorite ones was the inmate, the inmate who was a bad guy, and we saw how the prison was changing as people were catching Crown Royale. Suddenly, all the fights and all the problems that were in the prison had changed, and people were embracing and people were being happy, and he just hated that, and he was afraid that he was going to catch it. And then in the main story, that character is brought back, and we see what he's like once he's caught it. He's still aggressive. He's still a bad guy, but now it's in the service of happiness, which is kind of creepy.
It was very creepy, yes. I would love to talk a bit more about the impact of Crown Royale on people in more detail. So we will delve a bit more into that in our spoiler section. But before we move on, this is a question that we ask all of our interviewees. Do you have any book or author recommendations to share with our listeners?
Certainly. I just finished Starter Villain by John Scalzi. I love his stuff. His books just always make me laugh out loud. They're so clever. I'm actually gone right on from that into reading his next one, When the Moon Hits Your Eye, which is the basic concept is ridiculous, and yet he manages to pull it off. Is that suddenly the moon turns to cheese, and scientists and everybody is trying to deal with the fact that suddenly the moon is actually cheese. And how does that affect the world? It seems like it can't work, and yet it does. He pulls it off. I would say one of my favorite books that I've read over the past few years, because it keeps coming back. People keep talking about it, and I keep remembering how much I love this book, is a book called This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Right, yes.
And it is by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. And it's these two characters basically in two different universes, two different realities. And they are going back in time trying to make the world become their reality. And so they're going through time to create their own future, because at some point the futures diverge, and one of them exists from this future, one exists in the other future, and they're at war trying to make sure that their future is the one that will exist. And in the process, they fall in love. And it's just it's a fascinating story. It's one of those stories that I read and I remember saying to myself, I wish I would have thought of that. Those are the books that always get me, the ones that I say to myself, man, I wish I would have thought of that.
They sound wonderful. And for listeners, we will put links to those books on our blog post and show notes that accompany the episode. I think we've got to dive into some spoilers now.
All right.
As
Warning,
we really want to dive in. So a warning to the listeners, of course, if you haven't read the book, please go out and read All Better Now and come back to listen to the second half of the episode, which is going to start now. All right, so spoiler questions, our favorite part of any author interview. First of all, we really want to talk about the impact of Crown Royal in terms of mental health. So this is obviously something we're really fascinated by on our podcast and our blog, is the depiction of mental health and mental well-being in fiction. So can you please tell us about how you approach writing the impact of Crown Royal on characters who have experienced some mental health difficulties within the book?
And, having written a book on mental health, Challenger Deep, and having my son having had difficulties with mental health, I was very aware of the question when I was working on the book. In terms of depression, I would say that Crown Royal cures depression, because basically it brings joy and happiness. It lifts depression. For other mental illness, I would say that it affects it, but doesn't get rid of it. I mean, if you're struggling with schizophrenia, you will still be struggling with schizophrenia, but perhaps the paranoid aspect will be gone. Perhaps you'll be experiencing more of the elation that comes with it. And yes, your mind will still not be functioning at full capacity, but you'll still be in a better emotional place, if not a psychological place. So that was the way that I approached it.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because there is a character later on in the book, Rubian, is that how I pronounce his name? Yeah. And we had sort of a reference to his schizophrenia, and Ron sort of wondered if his delusions are a bit gentler, I suppose. And that's I found that fascinating as well.
Yeah, I tried to depict that character as still having delusions, but the delusions are no longer horrific, or no longer terrifying. And then ultimately that becomes more livable for him, because, I mean, when you're suffering from severe delusions that shake you to your core, it's a nightmarish place to be. He's still living in a dream, but it's a dream, not a nightmare.
Interesting. And, from my perspective as well, we know that almost all mental health diagnoses, or like clinically diagnosable mental health conditions, have some sort of impact on mood, or very commonly coexist with depression as well. So I could certainly see how for people, with a range of mental health concerns, having this ultimate contentment would have a very positive impact on their lives, even if it's not going to be removing every potential mental health difficulty that they have. Even a character who experiences anxiety, or a clinically diagnosable anxiety disorder, having that layer of concern or fear removed or lessened could certainly impact on their well-being in a really dramatic way. At least in Australia, I don't know the stats internationally, but it's estimated that about 1 in 5 people have a mental health condition in
Yeah,
any
same here.
one year. Yeah, and I imagine in Western countries it's quite similar rates at the moment. So I can imagine, the real significant impact on like a population level of well-being. Yeah, it's a big scale intervention in a way.
Yes, very much so. But then look at the other side. What about the people who are too afraid to catch it, who are doubling down on their own neuroses, who are more comfortable with the way they are than wanting to change it? And I think there's a lot to be said for stepping out of your comfort zone. If your comfort zone is your mental illness, it becomes a frightening thing to step out of that. Once you're there, once you're out of it, once you've gotten to a better place, you can look back and say, "Oh, I'm glad I'm here." But making that leap and trusting that that better place is going to serve you is a big deal. And that's why I think there are so many characters who are terrified of Crown Royale, who are trying to turn it into a terrible thing, who are looking at it saying that it's body snatching, that it's taking away your agency, it's taking away who you are, and therefore you don't want this. I think a lot of that comes from fear. And it's legitimate fear, because if you're on that side of it, this could be true. You could be losing who you are. You could be being taken over. But once you're on the other side of it, you can realize that that's not the case. But how do you get there? How do you trust that you're going to get to that better place?
And we do have several characters in the book who either embody that fear or have been, I suppose I'm thinking of Dame Haviland, who's sort of forced into that transition. And I find that really interesting because, like, Dame Haviland, for example, she becomes sort of gentler. She's no longer this petty, vengeful person, but she's still quite determined, I suppose.
Determined and manipulative.
Yes.
That was one of the
She's
things that I
ruthless.
wanted to preserve with all the characters is that even though you've sort of had this emotional change and you're now positive and you understand what contentment and joy means, it still doesn't change certain things about your basic nature. She is still manipulative, but now her manipulations are in service of happiness and trying to stop what she started before she caught Crown Royale. So she's my favorite character in the book, actually.
Yes, I do like all the little petty things that she does. It's very entertaining as long as you're not the person on the receiving end.
Yes. But then all the people on the receiving end deserved what they got from her. So
That's true. That's true.
so there's kind of a little bit of a guilty pleasure in sort of liking the stuff that Dame Haviland did before she caught Crown Royale.
Yeah.
And how she also has this kind of moral code that
Yes.
maybe becomes a bit strengthened after catching Crown Royale as well. So we'll see that she will do kind of unethical things, but maybe won't push it as far as she would have previously,
Yes.
or will kidnap somebody, but her threats to kill are empty threats. So it's
Yes.
interesting where the line gets drawn for some of these characters, those with more questionable morality after catching Crown Royale, because happiness and contentment, it's not the same thing as completely shifting your moral compass, but they certainly seem to be related in the book.
Well, I mean, there is the convict who has caught Crown Royale and has seen the joy, has had this awakening, and yet what does he do? It's a spoiler. He basically attacks Morgan, rips open her hazmat suit, and breathes into it to get her sick.
Ugh.
What a violation. He is still the same violating creep that he was, but now he's doing it for a different reason, but it hasn't changed his basic nature.
And as well, the number of characters who are determined to infect others with Crown Royale throughout the book, regardless, for some people it's about giving them the choice and saying, do you want to catch this virus in a way? But for others, it's seen to be this greater good sort of thing. And that's an interesting moral dilemma that occurs throughout the latter half of the book in particular, is it okay to infect people with this virus against their will if it means that they're going to ultimately feel happier.
And that is a good question. Both sides of that have validity. And I didn't want to say one is wrong and the other isn't. I didn't want to put values on that, but I wanted to pose the question. Is it okay to give something they don't want if you know for a fact that they are going to be better because of it? Some people would say yes, other people would say no. I would leave it up to the reader to decide.
Yeah, and of course, there's always, the stat of like 1 in 4 or 5 people will die when they catch Crown Royale. And Ron made that argument that, but they will die happy. Isn't that worth it? And that's so interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted there to be, when I first started it, I was thinking there is no mortality rate to it. But that would shift it too far, I felt, towards Ron's point of view. So I wanted to shift it a little over that there is risk. And the risk I wanted to be very similar to COVID. I mean, COVID was at one point was 1 in 20. It was 3% of the population. 3% of people who caught COVID would die. I just bumped that up 1%, 4%. So one in 25, would die of this. Instead of with COVID, it was more like 1 in 30. So there's not that much of a difference. And if you know for a fact that if you walk into a place where you're going to spread this to everybody in the room, there's 100 people in the room, knowing that 3 of the people in this room are going to die because you spread it, is it worth it for the 97 people or 96 people that are going to find absolute joy and contentment for the rest of their lives? Is it a worthy and worthwhile sacrifice? Is it justified?
It's a big moral dilemma. Absolutely.
I love moral dilemmas.
Yes.
And another part of it too is we see we don't get a huge sense of the long-term impacts of Crown Royale in the book. The book, of course, is only covering one fairly short time in
Yes.
Only a few months, right? So we don't see all the long-term effects, but one we do see is I can't remember the exact phrase I used when I was talking with you, Priscilla. I think it was something like dangerously altruistic, where a lot of the people, we see this multiple times, and it becomes a real concern for some characters in the book, where people will be so selfless, at least in the facing of individual danger or threat to someone's life, that they will put themselves in danger and quite foolishly go ahead and try to help someone else. And then that can, cause the unfortunate ripple effect of further deaths because people are putting themselves in dangerous situations to help others. Can you comment on that part of that aspect of Crown Royale?
That actually came out of an early book that I had written. I had written a book very early in my career called Kid Heroes, and it was about kids that had done heroic things. And in my research for that, I came across a publication by the Carnegie Hero Fund, and there were actually 2 publications. Every year they put forth 2 books of people who had done heroic things, and the other book was people who died trying to attempt heroic things. And there were an equal number of people who died trying to save someone's life as actually saved someone's life. And so that stuck with me. And I thought, if altruism becomes one of the things, if helping other people becomes one of the results of Crown Royale, of that sense of wanting to be a better human being and help other people, then there are going to be people who sacrifice themselves. And how bad is that going to be? And I wanted to show how bad that could be. But I also wanted to point out, and one of the characters talks about this, human nature is something that we've always had to deal with. When we have impulses to do bad things, we have to learn how to fight those impulses and become better because of it. If now our impulse is only to do positive things, when it becomes problematic, we have to learn to fight that impulse too. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to continually jump into a river and drown to save somebody who's floundering out there. It means that we have to develop the mechanism, the internal mechanism, to stop ourselves from jumping into a dangerous situation that is just going to make it worse. now some people would say that with Crown Royal, this is going to destroy us because we are all going to, to sacrifice ourselves, and it's going to be a bad thing. But I think more likely we're just going to have to learn how to resist our positive impulses the way we now resist our negative impulses.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, we would love to talk about a potential cult leader. He's giving very cult leader vibes of Jarek
Yes.
Javins, the formerly richest man in the world who caught Crown Royal and potentially twice and recovered twice. So he seems to have reached this higher level of being in a way. And I found it really fascinating because the guard started, in the book, referring to him with the capital H.
Yes.
I was like, oh, what's going on here? So, yeah. Would you mind
This
talking a little bit
nature.
about him?
We can't get past some aspects of human nature where they want to revere him, they want to treat him like a cult leader when that's not what he wants. And there are hints that this could become a problem. And that's something that I'm going to deal with in the second book, which is going to be called, it's going to be duology. All Over Now is the second one, and it's going to be dealing with questions like that. There's going to be more people like Jarek Javins. There's going to be very few people can catch Crown Royal twice, a very, very small percentage of the population, but all of those people sort of become these enlightened gurus. And they start developing a following, not because that's what they want, but that's just what people do. And so that's something that I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but that's something that I'm going to explore in the second book.
Yeah.
As for the character Jarek Javins, I kind of like him. I mean, he's kind of creepy in a but in a good way.
Yeah.
Because I mean he is trying to spread Crown Royal, he's trying to see beyond the problems that it can cause to the good, to the larger to the larger world. But at the same time, there is a level of creepiness to that, especially because he is ultimately such a powerful individual, and people are beginning to worship him just about.
Yeah, I think I was interested because some of the words that were used to describe him pre-Crown Royal was self-centered and arrogant and narcissistic. I think even he described himself as previously being a narcissist. And I was curious if, we talked about how Crown Royal doesn't really change your basic traits, I suppose, whether narcissism in this case is his personality in a way, and whether that would change once you find contentment.
He talks about that. He talks about the type of person that he was, and is sort of very very able to look at himself in that sort of from that third out of its own perspective, to see who he was versus who he is. And the idea of now, he realizes that he's a narcissist, but now narcissism, he's managed to rein narcissism in and turn it into something that can be useful for the world, which I wanted to play with that idea, that he couldn't change his basic nature, but now his basic nature can serve the world in a different way than it did before.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're really excited to see where that goes potentially in the second book as well.
So am I. I don't know where it's going. That's part of the discovery. There's so many things that you discover when writing.
Yeah. Really exciting to hear that this will be a duology with a second book in the works. Can you tell us anything else about what to expect in that sequel, when it might be coming out, the progress you've made? Yeah,
well, since this is the spoiler section, I can tell you a little bit. The story will take place a few months after the end of All Better Now. This new virus that Morgan has had a hand in creating, La Llorona, is basically the opposite. It's a virus that it's not so much creates misery, but creates neediness, a sense of emptiness that must be filled. The opposite of joy, the opposite of contentment. It creates discontentment. And there is a vested interest in trying to convince people that that's the virus that they want to catch. Everybody's going to catch one of them. You can only catch one. If you catch one, it protects you against the other. So which one are you going to catch? The one that keeps you needy, or the one that makes you content? And what are the values and drawbacks of both of them? And there's basically going to be a war between these two sides.
Fascinating. Can't wait to read it. It's also so interesting because from the description in the book, La Llorona is quite horrifying. It's not like Crown Royale where it's quite appealing, even if there's all this moral dilemma tied up in it. But I really would not want to catch the countervirus.
No, I mean, it presents itself as this malignant neediness. And the way I'm thinking it's going to go is that's when you're suffering from it, that's the symptom. And when you get over it, it's not quite as bad, but you are still have that constant feeling of emptiness and neediness. Not quite as bad as when you're in the middle of it, but still, it's not a joyful place to be. I was going to say we're talking about when it's going to be done. I can't write it yet. It's still in the wings because what I'm working on now is the prequel for Scythe, and that's taking up all of my creative energy right now.
I'm also excited for that.
It's going to be called Rising Thunder, by the way. I finally settled on a name, Rising Thunder.
Wonderful name. So this countervirus, it sounds like it's certainly got elements of depression, but it's not quite the pure opposite of Crown Royale, right? So it's not sadness necessarily. There's something else there. So I'd love to see how that plays out and what the impacts are for recoverees, and can't wait to unpack that in the sequel.
I think that pervasive melancholy is going to be part of it. Because, I mean, Crown Royale is not about euphoria. It's not about constantly being euphoric. There's a difference between contentment and euphoria.
Very true.
And there's a difference between depression and melancholy. And so I wanted them to sort of balance that way.
Makes sense.
Thank you so much, Neal. That was such a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
You're very welcome. It's rare that I've had the chance to go that in depth in All Better Now, and I really enjoyed doing it. It was really a lot of fun. So thank you.
And that wraps up our interview. A huge thank you to Neal for coming on the pod. That was so fun.
It really was, and so great to dive into all of Neal's thoughts on the moral quandaries of the book too. As usual, our detailed show notes will be available on novelfeelings.com, including social media handles and Neal's book recommendations. Link in the show notes for that. And don't forget to check out All Better Now, as well as Neal's back catalogue of books and TV writing. Quick question before we do our normal sort of outro. Priscilla, do you want to catch Crown Royale? What do you think?
I've been thinking about this since I finished the book, since I started the book. I think, yes. Like, I think it would be so good to be just content all the time and not feel like you have to keep constantly chasing something or getting something better or new. But I also think that maybe because I don't define myself by wanting to be, what am I saying? Am I an ambitious person? Like, okay, I guess I don't see myself as an ambitious person. So maybe that means that I'm more open to the idea of like living a life of contentment, whereas someone like the character Morgan is always wanting to get ahead, I suppose. And so being happy forever just seems like boring.
But would you be bored? Like, if you were just happy, I don't think you would be bored with that. So
yeah, well, I think actually think about it this way. Would we want to do our art projects if we were completely happy? I would say yes, because that's not something that we do out of a sense of need, I suppose. That's out of a sense of joy.
That's true, actually.
But would we want to go to work? Well, actually, our jobs would not exist anymore.
Well, I imagine the demand would be a lot lower, lower, wouldn't it? It sounds like they might still exist, like, you know, as Neal was talking about mental illness, for example. It's not going to go away. You know, it might be 1 in 10, 1 in 20 people that are living with a mental health issue per year as opposed to 1 in 5. So what would that mean? I mean, I'd love it if people were happier. Maybe they'd come to therapy for different reasons, though.
That's true. Yes. What about you, Elise? Do you think you'd want to catch Karen Royale?
With the information that I have about it from book 1, probably not. But I think I would be happy if I did. Like if I had the informed choice with the information currently available, I'd say no. And the reason for that is because I don't know enough about the long-term effects of it. I think it sounds like there isn't that many long-term effects, to be honest, but we just don't know yet. But will it turn out that, I don't know, after 6 months of infection, everyone suddenly becomes miserable, or everyone is, you know, has a susceptibility to a second virus, or like has a reduced immune response, or some other negative side effect that we don't know about yet? I don't know. But I'm sure if I did catch it, I wouldn't be upset about it. It's more about the informed choice.
Yeah, that's the nature of the virus, isn't it? You can't be upset about catching it. Yeah. Well, there's always the risk of not recovering, I suppose, if we don't want that to happen. Maybe the question should be...
Would you like to be a recovery?
That's right, thank you. I mean, there's also always possibility of being a twice recovery and then achieving that higher level of being.
Well, I have been meaning to become a cult leader, so it's on my to-do list. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. If you like us, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Find us online on Instagram and YouTube through novel_feelings, or search Novel Feelings Community on Facebook. If we have entertained you or taught you something, consider buying us a coffee to show your thanks. All proceeds go towards making the show stronger and more sustainable. All links are in the show notes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Catch you next time.
See ya.
Our podcast was recorded on Wurundjeri Land, which is home to both of us in Naarm, Melbourne.
We also acknowledge the role of storytelling in First Nations communities.
Always was,
Always will be
Aboriginal Land.